Right, so you might remember initial rumors on the iPhone 13 series were fixated on Touch ID making a return, but now that does not seem to be the case because Mark Gurman has said that Apple scrapped their plans for Touch ID on the iPhone 13 series, and well, it seems that Face ID is here to stay. And so let's delve into this report, but first make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumors, and with that being said, let's just tuck in. Right, so Mark Gurman in his latest newsletter revealed that Apple was indeed working on Touch ID for the iPhone 13 series. So yes, somewhere in Apple's HQ there were internal prototypes that did have in-display scanners. I believe John Prosser said the same thing, but now Mark Gurman has come out and said that Apple, for whatever reason, have scrapped their initial plans of reviving Touch ID. Now, Gurman does not reveal why this is the case, and honestly, I'm not too sure myself because in-display scanners are incredibly reliable now and a bunch of Android phones use them, and so I don't see reliability being an issue with these in-display scanners. And as for supply, I don't see that being an issue too because Samsung makes in-display scanners for their phones and they're the ones producing these new displays for the iPhone 13 series. And so I'm assuming it would have been pretty easy for Apple to also order in-display scanners for the iPhone 13 series alongside those OLED displays. And of course, if Apple was cautious about in-display scanners, they could instead go for the Touch ID power button methods we saw on the iPad Air. In fact, I don't see why Apple invested money and R&D into a Touch ID power button for the iPad Air if they're not going to use it on other devices. And so I just don't understand why Apple seemingly decided Touch ID won't make the cut with the iPhone 13 series. And yes, I know that COVID might be getting better in certain parts of the world, but that's definitely not the case everywhere. And so in this world of face coverings, Apple should really offer the convenience of Touch ID on their premium smartphones. I mean, these are going to be $1,000, $1,100, and people should not put up with the issues of Face ID. So yes, this is a major miss for Apple. This year would have been perfect for the revival of Touch ID, and so I'm pretty gutted we're not seeing that with the iPhone 13. And yes, I know some of you guys might say that number one, you can now use your Apple Watch to unlock your iPhone, and that is a very good point, but not everyone has an Apple Watch, including myself. I don't really want an Apple Watch, and so again, the convenience of Touch ID is definitely going to be the better move. And also another rebuttal point I hear very often is the fact Apple giving us Touch ID on the iPhone 13 would be Apple admitting defeat on Face ID, because if you remember with the iPhone 10 launch, Apple raved about Face ID and said it was gazillion times better than Touch ID, and so it would not be a good look for them to give us Touch ID on the iPhones again after saying that Face ID is superior. Well, again, like I said, this would be the perfect year to announce Touch ID again on the iPhone because they can use COVID as an excuse. Obviously, when Face ID was announced, we did not know COVID would be a thing, so of course, Apple can easily use COVID as an excuse to give us Touch ID on the iPhone. And so yes, again, I'm pretty disappointed we're not getting it this year. Now, Gurman does outline Apple's plans for the future with their biometrics. He says Apple's long-term goal is to give us under-display Face ID on the iPhone, and he says it should be similar to the implementation we see on the Galaxy Z Fold 3. Now, I am hoping it's not going to be completely identical because the Galaxy Z Fold 3's under-display camera kinda sucks. It's pretty visible most of the time, and also the quality of the actual camera is pretty subpar, so I'm hoping that Apple takes their time with this and gives us under-display Face ID when there are no compromises with the technology, which is certainly the case right now. Now, thankfully, Gurman does say there might be some hope we do see Touch ID in the future, and he gives us an outline for how Apple could implement this. So he says there are two possibilities. Either we see in-display Face ID on the Pros and Face ID built into the notch on the low-end iPhones, or maybe we see in-display Face ID on the Pros and then in-display Touch ID on the regular iPhones. Now, I would very much be a fan of the second option because obviously I don't want the notch to remain on the iPhone forever, and so even if we do lose Face ID on the regular iPhones, I would much prefer having no notch and having Touch ID built into the display instead. Also, assuming the COVID days are over by the time we do see these iPhones, I'm assuming in-display Face ID could be an incentive for most to get the Pro iPhones, since of course, unlike the Touch ID scanner where you have to put your finger on the screen, with Face ID you do nothing, and the phone recognizes you without a notch. CS, I could see Apple differentiating the Pro and regular models using Face ID and Touch ID. I mean, we do see that with the iPad lineup right now, we have Face ID on the Pros and then Touch ID on the lower end iPads, and so we could see a similar strategy with the iPhone. Though do note Gurman said a few weeks ago that Apple's ultimate goal is to give Face ID to all their products, and so it does kind of seem like Gurman is contradicting his own point, and so I guess the first possibility is going to end up being true, and we do see the notch on the regular iPhones into the 2030s. That's going to be a real shame. And of course, in a perfect world, I would love to see the Pros get both Face ID and Touch ID, but it seems Apple's not going to let us have both, and so I guess I'm fine with Apple at least offering the option on the regular iPhones. But guys, tell me in the comments below, do you prefer Face ID or Touch ID? Anyways, thank you for watching, make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumors. Check out the video in the icon above on details regarding the iPhone Fold, and on that note, I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya peeps!